People want to jump up and choke us and kill us. We need some black vigilantes.
Black Lives Matter is back, and so is Donald Trump. Is this just a coincidence or part of a broader left-wing plan to derail the Trump presidency? Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Today we're looking at the return of Black Lives Matter. They've been relatively quiet over the past 4 years of the Biden presidency, but now as Donald Trump prepares to take office next month, they are back on the streets. Coming up on the program, an exciting debate with the co-founder of BLM New York.
If this were two white men, Daniel Penny would be in jail.
And he punched a 67-year-old woman hard enough to break her orbital bone.
But first, let's look at the reason why BLM is back, or at least why they say they're back.
The jury has reached a unanimous verdict in the case of Daniel Penny. He's been found not guilty on the charge of criminally negligent homicide.
He's finally got the justice he's deserved.
Daniel Penny, a 24-year-old former US Marine, was riding the subway in New York when Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old man with a long history of mental illness, got on and started to intimidate other passengers with his behavior.
The whole train was freaked out. He was either going to pull a gun, a knife, or
He said, I'm willing to die, you know, I'm willing to get killed.
The three main threats that he repeated over and over was, I'm going to kill you, I'm prepared to go to jail for life, and I'm willing to die. I was scared for myself, but I looked around, I saw women and children. He was yelling in their faces, saying these threats. I couldn't just sit still.
Penny put Neely in a chokehold to restrain him with the help of other passengers, including several black passengers. Neely died after being held around the neck for more than 6 minutes.
I think this guy is on drugs, you know, because when he came in, he was unbelievably off the charts. He scared the living daylights out of everyone.
I miss my son. My son didn't have to go through this. I had enough of this. The system is rigged.
Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who critics have described as being a radical leftist, was behind the indictment of Penny.
It's a failure on the part of Alvin Bragg. He tried this case for political, racial reasons.
The jury was asked to decide if Penny was guilty of second-degree manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide. After a 5-week trial on December 9th, Penny was acquitted of homicide. The more serious manslaughter charge had already been dismissed. Black Lives Matter launched street protests that very evening. While Penny went out with his lawyers, and a few days later was invited to a football game with Donald Trump. Speaking after the verdict, Penny said he doesn't regret his actions.
The guilt I would have felt if someone did get hurt, if he did do what he was threatening to do, would never be able to live with myself.
As soon as the verdict of not guilty came down, there were leftists who basically threatened to kill Daniel Penny.
We need some black vigilantes.
Right.
People want to jump up and choke us and kill us for being loud. How about we do the same when they attempt to oppress us?
Okay, let's bring in our guests now. And today we have Chivona Newsome, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Greater New York. Wilfred Reilly, the author of Hate Crime Hoax, and Brandon Tatum, a former police officer in Arizona. Welcome to the program, everybody. Chivona, I'd like to start with you, if I may. You attended the trial. You were there almost every day. And I know that the jury found Daniel Penny not guilty, and you do not respect that verdict at all. Why not?
I don't. When we look at the discrepancies in jury, when we look at the long history of white vigilantism, when we look at the overwhelming amount of facts from witnesses, medical examiners, and let's not forget a 6-minute long video, if Daniel Penny was a black person or anyone other than a white, blue-eyed male, he would be serving time for his crime.
Brandon Tatum, I saw you smile a little bit. Ironically, when Chivona talked about white vigilantism, why did you pick up on that phrase?
Because I believe that it's disingenuous. I think that it's just propaganda. There's no truth in it. I mean, the young lady says that if he was black, he would be treated a different way. Give me an example of a black man doing exactly what Daniel Penny did and ended up getting a harsh sentence. I think the converse would happen. if Daniel Penny was a black man and Jordan Neely was a white man, we wouldn't be talking about this. If there were two black men, we definitely wouldn't be talking about it. If it was two white men, it would be an invisible situation. So I just think it's a talking point. I think that's maybe how some people may want to feel, but the reality is that that's just not true. I think this was a proper verdict. The jury did their job. Stevie Wonder can see that this wasn't an intentional murder, and I think Daniel Penny did what he had to do to protect the lives of other people.
A 6-minute long video with a medical examiner calling it a homicide. Jordan showed all signs of asphyxiation. He was, in fact, murdered. Brazilian jiu-jitsu workers, trainers, they all came on and said, no, the hold was improper. We had a Marine who trained Daniel Penny come in and said that Daniel Penny was wrong. If this were two white men, Daniel Penny would be in jail. If it were two black men, Daniel Penny will be in jail. But when we look at the long history of white vigilantism in America, from Emmett Till to Trayvon Martin to another Jordan by the name of Jordan Davis, we see that white people have felt empowered since the Fugitive Slave Act to take the law into their own hands.
Let me pose some of these points to Wilfred Reilly now. Wilfred, Chivona has basically said that, in the course of the trial, experts came forward and said that Daniel Penny went well over the top in restraining Jordan Neely. What do you think?
I think Chivona gave an eloquent description of the past, but I mean, in reality, in modern day New York, I mean, if Daniel Penny were a black guy, he'd be Jordan Williams. We've seen a bunch of these cases as crime has surged over the past couple of years with people fighting along racial and political lines in the streets. Frankly, I mean, we've seen Jose Alba, we've seen Jordan Williams. I mean, in most of these cases, charges were brought. In most of these cases, charges were dropped or people were acquitted. So, I mean, I don't think it's the case that if a black man were charged with Daniel Penny style offenses, he would go to jail. In fact, the Jordan Williams charges, I believe, were dropped with more alacrity than Daniel Penny's charges. The Jordan Neely case was a situation where Jordan Neely wasn't an innocent Michael Jackson impersonator.
Chivona, we're going to let him finish his point because we can't hear you.
44 previous felony offenses. On one occasion, he snatched a 7-year-old kid. On another occasion, he punched a 67-year-old woman hard enough to break her orbital bone. I don't really know why in the USA, whether or not you think a line was crossed during this particular fight, we make heroes out of this type of guy. But I mean, as Jordan Neely said things like, I'm going to hurt everyone in this train car, I'll kill, I don't care if I go to prison. Daniel Penny, along with two other guys, by the way, one of whom was black, jumped in and subdued this guy. So I'm not at all surprised to see a not guilty verdict in this sort of case. I trained as a lawyer. Mr. Tatum was a police officer. I mean, jury can go either way, but this is not at all a surprising verdict.
Chivona Newsome, I want to just make sure we heard those points there from Wilfred Reilly. One of them is that Jordan Neely had a record of committing violent acts, including on the subway, and therefore it was appropriate to take the action that he did when Penny restrained him.
He was filled with demons, and it started at age 14 when his mother was murdered, stuffed into a suitcase and thrown on the side of the road. Let's be very clear with that. But as people who are in law enforcement and who stand for the law, how could you not respect the DA, a prosecutor who has won most of her cases? Why would they try this case if it was no facts? And if we're going to go into other facts, a trained killer, Daniel Penny, knew that you should not do that.
Forgive me, Chivona. Is it right to call him a trained killer, or is it more appropriate to call him a trained soldier?
A trained soldier, a trained killer, an assassin. Looking at that minute-long video, and look at the video after. He showed no remorse when first responders, when the NYPD tried to save Jordan Neely's life, Daniel Penny laughed. Everyone neglects to say that he was asking for food, that he was asking for water. No one was threatened by him.
And read all these police reports like I did. I've just read what was said.
Okay, Chivona, we've heard your point. We just want to hear from Wilfred. Wilfred, could you respond to that?
When you look at these police reports, so people have said that Daniel Penny is the source of the comments about what Jordan Neely said. I'll hurt everyone on this train. In reality, of course, I mean, the cops are going to talk to multiple people. They're going to be written reports. Officer Tatum could probably speak to this in more detail, but you're going to have a pretty fully documented record of what went on here, and all these people are going to be called to the stand. So, I mean, when you look at what witnesses said, I mean, the mother with the baby carriage said some things really for both sides, but also said, I was barricaded with my kid behind this carriage as this homeless lunatic, this crazy vagrant screamed and shouted. And then finally, these guys stepped forward and intervened in the situation. So to present this as guy had some demons inside him, he was asking for water. No, I mean, if someone says, I'm going to kill you, and someone else grabs him, that's not an unprovoked response against a black man in Donald Trump's America or something like that.
Brandon Tatum, given the background of Jordan Neely that Wilfred Reilly has outlined, do you think that Daniel Penny did the right thing and that he actually saved people from being injured?
As a former police officer, when I first saw the video, I knew that he would not be found guilty. And the reason why I knew that, because I understand the law. You cannot have a person on a train threaten the lives of other people and take a threatening stance. There were multiple people who testified that they felt like their life was in danger.
But Brandon, Chivona says that she believes, and numerous experts have presented, that the choke was held for too long.
I mean, that's up for debate. When I watched the clip, I don't think that the choke was held too long, and I don't think it was a legitimate choke. If you look at anyone that is a professional fighter, anyone that's trained in doing a carotid choke, which that's what people claim that it was, you won't last more than 5 seconds if someone applies an appropriate carotid choke. If you are to hold somebody down for 6 minutes, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see a person struggle for a duration of time. That is not a legitimate choke. Anybody that fights in the MMA, anybody that fights professionally, mixed martial arts, they will tell you, if you try to do that choke in a fight, you will lose. So I don't think Daniel Penny applied an appropriate choke in order to hurt the guy. I think he was doing the best he could to control his head and hold him down until the police responded.
On that point, you and Chivona are going to have a dispute. Let's move on to the BLM reaction now to the incident, Chivona. Your brother, Hawk Newsome, quite a prominent man in New York. The two of you established this chapter of BLM, if you like. He was out on the streets the same day calling for black vigilantes to, quote, do the same as Daniel Penny. Presumably, if you were to extend that, he means he would like to see black vigilantes choking white people for being too loud. Is that what he means?
No. And I think that we can't misquote his word. Donald Trump and Mayor Eric Adams called for people to stand up and step up like Daniel Penny. So Eddie Gibson, who was a man on the train, the one who had begged for Daniel Penny to stop because he said that Jordan had defecated in urine on himself. Imagine if he would have put Daniel Penny in a chokehold. Jordan Neely would still be here. Black people, we can no longer sit back and record where our own people were being killed. We see the same rhetoric being praised by Donald Trump, being praised by Mayor Eric Adams, and being praised by all of the MAGA-tards who support this lunacy. So why is it blown out of proportion when a black person says that? We can't defend ourselves?
Yeah, come in, Brandon.
Well, I think that the problem is that you and your brother refuse to take accountability for the actions of black people. For some reason, you think they're just absolved of everything just because of the color of their skin. You're not talking about at any point that he was schizophrenic and that he was on K2 spice, which is an illegal substance that makes you absolutely crazy. And you're not, and you see the dad come out and he wants to now sue Daniel Penny for money. Where was his daddy at this whole time? What Black Lives Matter should be doing is that you should be encouraging fathers to be in their sons' lives, because he wouldn't be on the streets struggling and begging for food on a subway train if somebody was there for him and supported him. How about Black Lives Matter support the man before he dies? Support him before he's on K2 spice. Support him while he's schizophrenic and get him the help that he deserves. Instead, you guys are out here talking about vigilante justice, trying to, fight fire with fire. What we need to do is hold black people accountable, and we would never have a Jordan Neely.
Just a quick answer and a response from all of you, Chivona and then Wilfred, and then we have to move on. Chivona, just quickly, please.
Officer Tatum, I need you to hold white people responsible. I need you to no longer deny racism. We fed over 250,000 people. Jordan Neely you're blaming his family, but where was Daniel Penny's family during the trial? The only people who showed up were subpoenaed. He's estranged from his relative. The man was selling T-shirts at a shop. You made him into a national hero when he was a drifter and a bum. Jordan Neely was a 30-year-old man, and countless friends and family members showed up and said, hey, we searched for him, we'd find him, and he would run. Yes,
Chivona, we take your point. We have to move on to the broader point about BLM returning. Wilfred, just a quick response, though, please. Wilfred?
Yeah, I mean, so this whole thing about like we need black vigilantes. First of all, if a decorated black Marine had gotten into a fight with a white drifter that threatened an entire train car and the white drifter had ended up dying, nothing would have happened. That wouldn't have been a national story at all. Mayor Adams might well have given that guy a medal. So, I mean, if that's what's being referred to, I don't really think anyone has a problem with that. Also, this idea that it's 1862 and white people are regularly attacking black people, this is actually something I professionally researched. Like classic interracial crime, like white on black or black on white, violent crime, that's about 3% of serious crime every year. It's 80% black on white.
Can I just pick up on a point that Brandon was making, which is that BLM needs to support black people more? They've done a phenomenal job back in 2020 of raising funds. They revealed themselves, Black Lives Matter Global Network revealed it took in $90 million in donations in 2020, but curiously, only a third of that went to charitable donations. Now, just have a listen to the reaction of journalists when they heard that news.
$60 million of BLM's war chest is currently missing. Poof. Just like that, it's gone.
Black people were exploited. Black Americans were exploited by Black Lives Matter for the personal gain of a few.
We found that $30+ million went to the stock market. I thought this was about tearing down the institutions of white supremacy.
Chivona, I do appreciate that your organization in New York is not a BLM Global Network, and indeed your brother has called for them to account for what's going on with all that money. But do you accept that they've somewhat tarnished the reputation of the movement?
I think that they gave racism an amazing excuse to discredit the millions of people who came out to march for George Floyd. We own a Montessori school, which provides a $50,000 free education to 86 kids, 250,000 people fed. Last night, I was in the nation's poorest congressional district handing out Christmas trees to people who can't afford them. But if you talk about money, if you talk about the fraud of others, then you discredit what I'm saying. But we don't talk about the CEOs who have stolen from the healthcare industry or the petroleum industry.
Why did your brother ask for an investigation into the missing 60 million then?
I think they need to be held accountable because people trusted in them and people donated to them. We never received a portion of that budget, but yet we find a way to uplift our community every day. Over the last 4 years, we've been doing the real work in our community.
Really? Wilfred, I know you've looked into the funding of BLM and in quite some detail.
Yeah, and I think it's important to draw a distinction here between local civil rights groups that might spar with me and Brandon, but that do things in the community, and national organizations. So like what's being referred to as BLM GNF, which is Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Now, I will say the amount of money that was raised by everything affiliated with BLM GNF wasn't 90 million, it was 11.6 billion. You can check that out. That was The Economist in the UK in, I believe, October of 2020. That includes corporate pledges and so on down the line. Myself and Fraser Myers over at Spiked UK, great guy, tried to track that money down. It was very difficult. What we found actually was that the sort of Patrice Cullors national or international Black Lives Matter wasn't very focused on what you could call sort of the hood and the holler, like core poverty issues. The founders of the group began as primarily LGBT activists, and the money that we could find went to a lot of causes like that, like For the Girls, which, if I can recall, was a travel project for Black sex workers, Transgender Travel Fund, the Okra Project, which is another sort of thing like that. A lot of the money, 6- and 7-figure donations, went along those lines. But yeah, I mean, you can't help but notice that the BLM core organization took in hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and spend it on some stuff that people didn't necessarily expect, while the founders got some very large homes. So yeah, I mean, I think most people would call for an investigation there. And I mean, people on the panel have mentioned there's fraud in some white businesses. I think if a white MAGA charity had done this at the same level, we would have seen national calls for an in-depth investigation picked up by pretty much everyone.
Brandon, I need to move this on now to one of the questions online, which is, where have BLM been during the Joe Biden presidency? We all know that during Trump's presidency, there were a lot of protests following the death of George Floyd in 2020. Let's have a look at these pictures, if you can cast your mind back. Thousands of protests all over America. A number of policemen were actually killed in one incident in St. Louis. A former police captain, David Dawn, was murdered by a protester/looter by a young black man called Stephen Cannon, who shot him 10 times. A police station in Minneapolis was set on fire. So the question, Brandon, is where have they been the last 4 years? And do you think they're going to come back on that magnitude or in that magnitude during Trump's second term?
Well, I think it's a possibility that they come back during Trump's second term, because that's what they're about. They're the military arm of the Democrat Party. They don't care about black people, because if you're not the black person that they like, they don't care nothing about fundraising for you, giving you money, and caring about your family. So I think that they may make a comeback because it's a grift. A lot of them are grifting. Now, I don't know the local BLM chapters, what they're doing. They may do an incredible job giving out food and helping the community, but they're not doing anybody a justice, or any young man any justice, by not holding them accountable. That's my biggest problem with it. But can we do all of it? I think everybody on this panel love black people. Everybody on this panel would love to see black people shine in America. But we got to start doing both. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. Raise money. I'll send money. I'll donate. But then we also have to hold young black men accountable when they do things they're not supposed to. And when white people cut up, when black people cut up, let's all hold them accountable. If we can be honest, we wouldn't have a problem. The situation we spoke about before, we can all agree that we should be able to agree in the verdict there. Let's move on to the next one and have a fair evaluation, and not just be so biased to say, if it's a black and a white, we're going to go with the black man no matter what.
Chivona, I'm going to give the last question and answer to you. There is a headline in a newspaper called Unheard: Daniel Penny acquittal confirms end of BLM era, because the protests were relatively small after the verdict. Do you accept that BLM has reached its end?
I think using terms like BLM return or BLM has come to its end is nothing more than this rhetoric. And we can't ignore race in America. It's inherently biased, and it's filled with that. So it's smack in the face of people who've come out over the last 4 years, no matter who's president, people who have pointed fingers and asked for accountability from President Biden and Kamala Harris. And if you notice, no BLM, global or state chapter, actually endorsed the Democratic president. So it's just another way of silencing us.
Chivona Newsome, Wilfred Reilly, and Brandon Tatum, thank you all. Much appreciated. Well, the New York District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, was the driving force behind the indictment of Daniel Penny. He ordered for him to be charged, even though he'd been released without charge. He's the same DA who pushed for Donald Trump to be prosecuted in New York.
No matter who you are, we cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
So let's bring in Vinoo Varghese now, a former New York prosecutor and a Nexus regular. Welcome back to the program, Vinoo. Let me ask you, the New York Post is reporting that the acquittal of Daniel Penny is a major blow to Alvin Bragg's reputation. Do you think it is, and if so, why?
So it's not a blow. I think what Bragg's prosecution of Daniel Penny did was to appease the left-wing, angry, mob of people who felt that, hey, this was a white guy killing a black man, you must prosecute him, even though there was no legal basis to prosecute Daniel Penny.
The fact that he was acquitted, the fact that he was acquitted, though, and a lot of people are saying that was very much to be expected, doesn't that bring into question Bragg's judgment? Really?
Yeah, because look, I think in this city, particularly, in Manhattan, in this borough, which is overwhelmingly blue. There's a lot of, white guilt. So there's almost this feel like, oh, we have to, convict this guy. Remember, he's not a New Yorker. He's a Long Islander. He's white. He's in the military. All these things that are unpopular in New York. The reality was there was a chance, and I was worried when I was on your program a year ago. I was concerned that he may get convicted of one charge, but I'm happy for him. I don't believe he should have been prosecuted. I mean, there was so much reasonable doubt from the beginning that, you're really pushing the envelope to bring a prosecution of this guy. But, he had to. He did his thing to ensure that certain groups are going to continue to support him because he went and he prosecuted this guy. So he's safe. But look, he prosecuted Trump. He's probably going to be DA for 3 terms at least.
Wow. Vinoo Varghese, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus, TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.